At 42, Michael Turner started noticing something uncomfortable. It was not a crisis. Nothing in his life had collapsed. But slowly, almost quietly, he began to feel like everyone else was moving forward. And somehow, his own life had stopped moving. The realization started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Michael was standing in the kitchen of his townhouse, waiting for the coffee machine to finish its slow mechanical cycle. The kitchen was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels normal when you live alone long enough. Outside the window, early traffic moved through the street in a slow, predictable rhythm. Michael leaned against the counter and checked his phone. A notification appeared, a photo from an old college friend. The caption read, "Just signed the papers for the new house." The picture showed a smiling couple standing in front of a large two-story home. 2 kids, a dog, a wide driveway. Michael stared at the image longer than he expected. Then he locked the phone and looked away. But something about that moment stayed with him, a small discomfort, difficult to name. Later that morning, Michael sat at the long conference table inside his office building. The meeting was routine: quarterly projections, logistics planning, staff allocation. Michael had attended hundreds of meetings like this. But halfway through the discussion, the attention in the room shifted to a younger manager presenting a new operational strategy. The man was confident, focused. His presentation was clean and efficient. Michael listened carefully, and then something occurred to him. This manager was 32, 10 years younger, yet the leadership team was already speaking about him as someone with long-term executive potential. Michael sat back in his chair and folded his arms. He felt a faint pressure in his chest. Not anger, not jealousy, just a quiet recognition. 10 years ago, people used to say those same things about him. That evening, Michael scrolled through his phone again. He did not intend to compare himself to anyone, but the comparisons appeared anyway. A former coworker announcing a promotion, an old friend posting photos from a family vacation in Italy, a college roommate celebrating the launch of a small business. Each post seemed harmless on its own, but together they formed a pattern, a timeline of progress, milestones, movement. Michael set the phone down on the couch beside him. For a moment he stared at the dark television screen across the room. He realized something strange. He could name the progress in everyone else's life, but when he tried to describe his own, the story felt harder to define. That night, Michael sat alone at the small dining table in his kitchen. He had finished eating, but the empty plate remained in front of him. The house was quiet again, a quiet that felt heavier than usual. Michael leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead. He started thinking about the last 10 years. Work, marriage, the divorce, the routines that slowly filled the spaces in between. Nothing about those years had been chaotic. In fact, they had been remarkably stable. But as he replayed them in his mind, something felt missing. Momentum, direction. He suddenly wondered if stability had quietly turned into something else, something closer to stillness. The thought unsettled him more than he expected, because it forced him to ask a question he had avoided for a long time. Had he actually stopped moving forward? Or had he simply spent years watching other people move faster? Michael leaned forward and rested his elbows on the table. He realized something uncomfortable. For years he had been quietly measuring his life against the progress of other men. Men his age, men younger than him, men who seemed to be building something. And without noticing it, those comparisons had slowly reshaped how he saw his own life. Over the following weeks, the feeling returned more often. At work, Michael noticed how quickly the company was evolving. New technology, new leadership strategies, younger managers entering. Michael still performed well. His experience made him dependable. But sometimes he wondered if dependability had quietly turned. At night, his sea, not painful, just heavy, he began replaying small moments from his life. Decisions he once believed were practical, safe career moves, staying in one company too long, choosing stability over risk. None of those decisions were, but they had created a life that moved at a slow. And now, The thought that bother. What if he had, not I, but if he disappeared Tomar, someone younger, would, eventua. The machi. Michael rubbed his chest. He realized the discomfort was not really about success. It was for most of his adult life, he had believed something simple. A man proves his worth by building, achieving, providing. But what happens when life stops offering obvious milestones? One evening, Michael went for a walk through his neighborhood. The air was cool, and the streets were mostly empty. He walked slow. As he passed rows of houses, he noticed the familiar signs. New renovations, children's toys scattered across lawns, cars parked in freshly For years he had looked at these things as symbols, proof that life was moving in the right. But now another thought appeared. What if the real problem was not his progress, but the way he had been measuring it? Michael stopped at He realized that most of the pressure he felt came from a comparison. Not loud comparison, not jealousy, just small constant measurements. Who moved ahead faster? Who reached the next milestone sooner? Who seemed more certain about the direction of He had never consciously decided to compete. And without realizing it, maybe the problem was believing that life had a sieve. And if you missed it, everything after that moment felt Lee. The shift in Michael's thinking did not happen all at once. It started with hesitation. Old instincts are difficult, but one morning, while driving to work, he realized something simple. Most of the men different responsibility, different risks, different priorities. Their timelines were not actually connected to his. Michael Tai. For years, he had treated life like a race with invisible competitors. The changes that followed were small, almost invisible. Michael started waking up earlier, not because but because he wanted quiet time before the world stank. He began exercising again. Slow runs at first. Nothing just movement. At work, he stopped thinking about. Instead, he focused. Small efficiencies. Better communication with his team. Steadier. In the evenings, he spent He noticed how none of that. But, slow. For the first time in a long one evening months the sun was setting behind the trees across the street. He watched the light fade slowly into the quiet evening. And he too. At 42 he understood something he had never. Time does not move in equal chapters for everyone. Some men some rebuild later, and some spend years learning lessons. Michael also understood something about. A man cannot control the pace of other people's but he can control the discipline with which he builds. And perhaps the most important realization was this. Self-respect. It comes from knowing that you are moving forward in a way that is, even if the progress looks slower from Sometimes the question is not whether life is Sometimes the real question is quieter. Are you building a life that actually belongs to? Or are you still measuring it against It might be